Let's get reaction from retired U.S. Army General Keith Kellogg. General, first off, how long can these protests keep up? That depends on the will of the Chinese people. And then the second question would be, how tight of a rule and a hammer is Xi Jinping willing to bring down on his own people, even if it does risk his political standing?
Yeah, Cheryl, thanks for having me. Look, it's not dependent on the protests themselves. It depends on the will of President Xi and the military and his willingness to use it. We saw something like this happen about 40 years ago with Tiananmen Square, and the protests were much larger, but he used the military to strike it down pretty hard. When he starts bringing in just not the riot police, but he starts bringing in the military, he can shut this down, and I think we have to understand that. Where what we need to do is we need to, one, use the bully pulpit of telling the world and Americans that this is an autocratic regime that is cracking down on people wanting human freedoms, and we should use that. What Spokesman Kirby did yesterday was kind of just whitewashed it. The second thing we need to do is we need to really think hard about strategic decoupling of our economy with the Chinese economy, because they know that how important that interface we have with their economy and our economy, and how much we depend on it. Look, most of the stuff we get out of China, it's cheap stuff, and they know that. When you look at what China did, their GDP has grown before COVID 9% a year for the last 4 decades. When you look after they came into the World Trade Organization in 2001 because of what we did, their economy has grown, and they've used that growth of their economy to actually challenge the West, challenge the United States, not only in the Pacific region, but also globally. So there's a connection between what you're seeing, even though this is really not an economic disruption, that we saw a lot of it in Tiananmen Square, but it's based off COVID. It's the same kind of relationship that Xi has had with the people, which is autocratic, and he can crack down if he wants to. If he wants to, he'll bring in the military. That's what broke Tiananmen Square, and that's what can break this demonstration if he wants to do it.
Real quick, I want to move on to Iran, but I look back to 1952, and there actually was a regime change in China, in leadership because of the will and the voice of the people. A different time before social media and iPhones, but certainly precedent was set there. So we do, of course, our hearts break for the people of China right now. I want to move on to Iran, though, because what's interesting about today, you've got the World Cup going on in Qatar, Iran and the USA are playing, and then you've still got these protests that have gripped the nation of Iran. His own soccer, the Iranian soccer team is making a statement. They will not sing for their anthem. Risky, because now the government's threatening their families with torture. Your reaction?
Yeah. Well, remember, on the second game they played, they did sing the national anthem of Iran, even though they didn't do it on the first game. But this goes back to autocratic regimes. And you mentioned 1962. If the government, be it China or Iran, wants to use their military to crack down, they will. And these protests are nothing like we saw in 1978 and 79 in the Iranian Revolution, where thousands died, not just like 400. But this is a classic case of an autocratic regime cracking down. And I think the reason they sang the national anthem the second time and the lack of pushback is the Iranian regime probably reached out. The supreme leader probably told his military structure and his police structure to crack down hard on the demonstrations. So I know what we need to do is, again, use the bully pulpit, understand what's happening there, force ourselves into the situation by declaring how bad this is, but also understand that these autocratic regimes will keep doing that. So I wouldn't put too much into this, that this is going to be a regime change, because the people that have got the guns, and that's the government, be it both China and Iran, will eventually control the decision-making if the government structure has the will to do it. I remember a time when the United States would have been leading with all of these crises happening around the world, whether it was in China or Iran or the Middle East. And we're not doing that at all right now, and it's very unfortunate because people are suffering. General, it's great to get your perspective on world affairs. Thank you. Thanks, Cheryl.
All right, General Kellogg.